Designer handbags are bloody expensive, and honestly, not everyone can afford one. And every dollar we put towards a designer handbag is one less dollar we can put through to something else. And for the longest time, I always told myself I cannot afford designer handbags. Just wasn't for me, just wasn't for my budget. Yet somehow I've managed to build my dream collection of over 20 designer handbags, which I've collected over the last 5 years. And you know what I've learned over the last 5 years of collecting designer handbags is even if you can't afford to go into a designer store like Chanel or Louis Vuitton and buy one of their handbags, doesn't mean you can't have a designer handbag. Doesn't mean you can't afford a designer handbag, and it doesn't mean designer handbags aren't for you. You can still build your dream designer handbag collection by buying vintage and pre-loved, and that's exactly what I did to build my dream handbag collection of over 20 designer handbags, and this is why. Hey everyone, it's your girl Lady Vintage Bags here, your go-to girl for pre-loved vintage and affordable designer handbags. Now the word afford. This is a really interesting word because for the longest time, I always told myself I cannot afford designer handbags. Now the word afford, the basic definition of this word is to have enough money to pay for. However, in day-to-day life, that's not always how we really use the word. So a lot of the time, many of us will commonly use the word afford rather than meaning to have the money to pay for, like the basic definition. We kind of twist it in this more subjective way where we just base it off how we view our finances. So sometimes we tell ourselves, no, we can't afford to buy the good quality steak. But really, instead of meaning I don't have enough money to pay for, what we really mean is I don't want to be spending my money on that, or I don't want to be spending that much money on that. And for the longest time, I truly was, as per the definition, someone who couldn't afford to buy designer handbags. Like I literally did not have enough money to walk into a designer store and buy one of their designer handbags. Now I get it, designer handbags aren't meant to be affordable for everyone. They're not meant to be a household item for everyone to be able to get one. That's the whole point of them being luxury. That's the whole point of them being a designer house. And honestly, these sacks that carry our things cost thousands of dollars. Guys, if you have $2,000 these days, all you can get is an entry-level designer handbag. And who knows, probably within a few years with all this inflation, $2,000, even US dollars, probably won't even get you a designer handbag soon. And it's precisely the price that kept me away from designer handbags my whole life up until 2018. It just did not seem realistic for me to be spending hundreds, let alone thousands of dollars out of my budget for something that holds my things. It just, for my budget and what I was earning, it just wasn't happening for me at that time. And even when I got to the point where I was earning enough money that I did have the money to pay for a designer handbag, it just still didn't seem like an alluring enough deal for me to be spending that much money that took me weeks to earn on one sack that can carry my things. So I just sort of stayed away from it. I mostly just dabbled in fast fashion handbags and maybe here and there a contemporary bag like a Michael Kors bag, but I'd be buying it from places like Outlets or Ross. I'd never really truly got into the full price contemporary bags. And the funny thing is, even still to this day, as someone who's collected handbags for 5 years and has a collection of over 20 plus designer handbags, I still have this voice inside of me that's still telling me I still cannot afford to go into these stores and buy a handbag brand new. Isn't that weird? Isn't that like a little bit self-contradictory in my head? So how did I come to having a collection of 20 plus designer handbags, yet telling myself I cannot afford to have designer handbags? Well, things changed in 2018. So previous to that, all I sort of knew of luxury handbags, I didn't really grow up around luxury products. I didn't have a family that had luxury handbags, and I had friends who had contemporary handbags, but none of us were truly into luxury handbags, so I didn't have much knowledge about it. And all I knew up until then was the only way you could obtain a luxury handbag was you had to go into the store and splash lots of cash, unless you were lucky enough to have someone buy it for you, but that wasn't me. Ain't nobody buying me a designer handbag. So there I was, just trotting along, still telling myself I cannot afford a designer handbag. But I transitioned from not having enough money to, as per the definition, to transitioning to more of the subjective way of using the word, more in the sense of I just didn't want to spend my money on that. So I did have the money to spend on it, but I just didn't want to spend my money, that much money, the asking price on those handbags. So I continued to tell myself I cannot afford it, and it just wasn't part of my life. But in 2018, that's when everything changed. That's when I discovered the luxury resale market, the luxury vintage market. And then all of a sudden, it opened up my world to being accessible to luxury products now. I had no idea that there was this huge market of people buying and selling pre-loved luxury goods. And I was tantalized. I was curious. I was mesmerized. So many questions flooded into my head once I realized there was a luxury resale market. And so many of the questions I had are now questions that other people are asking me when they want to learn about the luxury resale market. Things like, are they real? Why are people selling their bags? Are they broken? Are they damaged? Do they stink? These are all questions that flooded through my head at that time. And you know what? I couldn't pull myself away from scrolling the luxury resale market. I started off on eBay Australia. Then I moved over to like Vestia Collective, and then I learned about Fashion File and the Real and other consignment stores. And the world of luxury resale just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And now you've got a plethora of Instagram sellers. There are just sellers everywhere. And you know what? This has been a long-term industry. I mean, in Japan, this isn't anything new. But when I discovered it, I was like, wow, I was so amazed. And now all of a sudden, luxury handbags were at a much more decent price point as per my preferences. And there was so much more financially accessible to me now. And now that's when I started telling myself, I can afford luxury handbags. I can have a luxury handbag. Hey, these are for me. And you know what, for me, I've always been a thrifter. In my uni days, or college days as you call it in America, I was already thrifting at that time. I was already mixing modern and vintage fashion. I love to mix high, low, modern, vintage. I love mixing everything. And I used to always play dress up with my mum's clothes. So anything from the 80s, the 90s, I love anyway. So when I discovered I could get vintage designer handbags, that was just my cup of tea. That is exactly the era that I love. And that's what I ended up collecting. 80s, 90s, early 2000s bags. They are just the bags for me. And now I was no longer brushing off designer handbags as not for me. I can't afford it. Not in my budget. Not for my tax bracket. I am now someone who can afford designer handbags, and afford I did. 20 plus of them I did. And you know what the funny thing is? The amount of money I had spent on pre-loved designer handbags, the thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars I spent on pre-loved designer handbags, I could have easily gone into Louis Vuitton. I could have easily gone to Chanel and bought their new designer handbags from the shelf. Heck, I could have bought a few of them. But yet, still to this day, I'm still telling myself I can't afford to do that. Yet I can afford to buy pre-loved designer or vintage. So I think what it is subjectively, what I really mean is that I don't want to spend those thousands of dollars that is the asking price of the brand new handbags. I'm not finding that to be a luring enough deal, a beneficial enough deal for me, that the cost is offsetting the use of the bags that they're offering. Whereas for the pre-loved and vintage ones, I am finding that to be an acceptable deal. I am finding that to be an alluring enough deal to get me to part with the amount of money that they're asking for what I'm getting for return. So isn't that interesting? It's really quite subjective, the way we use the word afford. Even though the basic definition is to have the money to pay for, a lot of the time, that's not really how we're using it. We're really using it to mean in the way of, I want to spend that much money on that. Or when we say I can't afford something, what we really mean is I don't want to spend that much money on that. And I'm not saying that's how we use it all the time. Heck, when I say I can't afford a Lamborghini, I mean that straight up, literally as per the definition. I do not have the money to pay for a Lamborghini. straight up. So we're not always using it in this subjective way, but I find that in daily life, a lot of the time we are using it in this subjective way. And what we really mean is, I don't want to spend that much money on that, whatever it is that we're talking about at the time. And actually, to add another layer of complication to the word afford, so number one, we've got the basic literal definition, to have enough money to pay for. And then number two, we've got our subjective interpretation or our subjective use of the word to mean I'm happy to pay that much money for that. And then I say I can afford it, or I'm not happy to pay that much money for that. And we say we can't afford it. Now, the third layer of complication is with today's modern lifestyle and our modern banking systems, there's actually many ways you can pay for something. I mean, you have the old traditional way, you have the cash to pay for it, or you have, a check or your debit card to pay for it where you're using your own money. Then you can use the bank's money. For example, you can use credit to pay for it. I mean, you could be lucky enough as a third way to be gifted it, where someone's just paying for it for you. And now we have this fourth way of this buy now, pay later concept, where these private companies are paying for you first and then you pay them back. So a lot of the time, when we think we can afford something, or when we tell ourselves we can afford something, we're not always using our own money to pay for it. So we don't always have the money to pay for something when we say, I can afford to pay for it. Now, for me, I'm not into going into debt to buy a handbag, so I don't want to be using the bank's money. And when I say the bank's money, I mean like having the credit, but then not having that money straight away to cover it. Because I know some people use their credit card to get points, but they transfer the money in straight away to clear the debt. And I don't have anyone to gift me bags, so that's out. And I'm not using a buy now, pay later service for a handbag either, so that's out. So really, I choose to only leave myself with the option of literally having the money to pay for it. But you'll find in other cases, and people have their own reasons for whatever financial decisions they make for themselves, your money, you do you, that when people use the word afford and can't afford, it's not always as clear as it may seem. Some people can say, I can afford something without actually having enough money to pay for it. And then like me, they'll say, I can't afford something, but then they do have the money to pay for it. They just don't want to. Now, on top of already being a vintage lover, I love having bags that are unique. These bags are older, and so they're not trendy. They're not in style unless there's been like a re-edition of the same style. For the most part, they're not the most popular bags, hence the lower price point as well. So they're used and they're not the most trendy bags. So that contributes to the price point being lower. But for me, the less demand that these bags have, the more unique they're going to be. I mean, I already, let alone never bump into anyone who's got the same designer bags as me. And I also very rarely find people on Instagram or social media or YouTube or whatever also having these similar bags. Not to say no one has the same bags, because there are a group of vintage lovers who have common interests as me and love common handbags as me too. But we are a small subset of the overall luxury community. So we'll find that we have quite unique bags in our collection out of the whole luxury community. And I really love that. I really love having bags that are special and hardly anyone ever has them. And not only that, I find the quality of the vintage to be very good. I mean, of course, if you buy a bag that's too used and too beaten up, the quality is going to start falling apart at that point. But if you can buy a bag in used but decent condition, you don't have to go full brand new, like new condition, unless you want to, of course. You can still get a bag that's used, and I mean like that's still decently used. You don't have to go too unused, and it still holds up really well. Like, look at this Monceau. This bag is over 20 years old, and what I love about vintage Louis Vuitton is that a lot of these bags have leather lining. Do you know how much of a luxurious touch that is when they have leather lining? You can't get that in a Louis Vuitton bag these days. This is such a special thing, and I love the quality, this thick canvas, the leather lining, it's beautiful. Now, maybe one day if my wealth increases, then maybe I will start telling myself I can afford to go into a store and buy these handbags brand new. And maybe at that point I will have more of a mix of new bags and vintage bags. But for now, I've been able to build my dream collection, never having gone into a store and buying a bag brand new, never having paid retail. Everything's pre-loved, everything's vintage. I've been able to build a collection for such a great price and have bags that I love. Will things change? Will my wealth change? Will my taste change? Probably we all evolve and grow over time as we get new experiences and new ideas and we learn different things. But for the meantime, I've been really satisfied with my journey of building my dream handbag collection. I mean, everyone has hiccups along the way with handbags, and there's things that we really don't like about our handbags sometimes. But overall, holistically, I've been quite happy with my journey so far. And I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. What are your thoughts on the word afford and how you use the word afford? Do you use the word afford in the literal sense, like have enough money to pay for? Or are you like me and you like to use the word in this more subjective way, where what I really mean is I don't want to pay that much money for, or I do want to pay that much money for? And tell me, what are your thoughts on buying brand new versus vintage? I know some people don't like pre-loved and don't like vintage, and they find that brand new is better for them. And then there are other people like me who haven't stepped foot into a store to buy brand new, but yet have built a whole collection, vintage and pre-loved, and are quite happy with it. And there are people with the mixed collection. Let me know what your collection is like. Are you a brand new person? Are you a pre-loved person? Or are you mixed? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below.